Good afternoon, John Verlin with On-Demand Advertising Solutions once again with a digital marketing update. This is the 29th podcast. This is the day after the big fight with Mayweather and McGregor, and had several analogies come to mind when I was pondering their pre-fight hype and all the things afterwards and everything. And that is this, and I'm entitling this, As in Boxing, Can Your Business Go the Distance? 3 questions you need to identify to defeat your competition. You need to answer. And that is this. Number 1, do you have a strategy, a plan of attack? Mayweather's was to be very defensive, wear out the opponent, which is pretty much what happened or has happened in a lot of his fights. But do you have a strategy? Have you actually sat down? And I say this because a lot of small businesses, when they go to get a loan, might have somewhat of a strategy. And the banks typically are going to demand a pretty thorough market analysis, competitive analysis, things like that. But a lot of times that can get pushed aside in day-to-day situations. So do you have a strategy? Are you working it, implementing it? Another question is, okay, so what if price doesn't really matter? What are you going to do? If you're competing, say, on price with your competition, what if the market says, well, price isn't that big of a factor? And the third one, and I'm going to give you some examples with these, how relentless are you in promoting yourself against your competition? Or do you just give up? Or do you just assume the good times will continue to roll? Okay, the first thing, do you have a strategy? And as I've mentioned in other podcasts, a lot of small businesses I've talked to and professionals really don't have and I guess it comes down to measuring the market, what the market's demanding. Recently, it was a great post by Elon Musk's ex-wife. She talked about what it takes to succeed, and she really gave a great answer, I thought. She said basically find 2 areas you're really passionate about and good in. And she mentioned business and engineering of her ex-husband, I would imagine. And then in those categories that you're interested in, your expertise is in, find the missing area that people are in really demand for, that really want passionately. And then merge those 2 categories together to create new industries. And I guess in a sense that's really what Elon Musk has done, if you think about it. Who would have thought or even planned for, let's go ahead and start a business, develop a new spacesuit to go to Mars? Now that takes some that takes some vision, in my opinion. I mean, how do you know there's a market for that now, today in 2017? Or are you just kind of throwing out your hobby, your interest, and putting money behind it because you have some, or you're raising some? So do you have a strategy for your business? And put it in writing, of course. A lot of businesses, I saw recently an infographic that said many people think success is this vertical or this angular straight line upward. But it's really a mishmash of crisscrosses and zigzags and all that. And that's really a strategy, at least gives you a written plan of attack, so to speak. Just like a boxer. They have to have a strategy going in. How am I going to go after this person's weaknesses? How am I going to, manipulate it, work it, whatever. Now, second point I wanted to make here is when price isn't an issue, what are you going to do to be different? I bring a case in point where I recently bought a smartphone, a prepaid smartphone, because I was tired of paying, my lease ran up and I was tired of paying a lot for a smartphone. I just wanted something fairly simple. And I paid $100 for a new ZTE smartphone that actually I really like. Very functional, just like my iPhone, et cetera, et cetera. But there was an LG, a little smaller, for $49.95, $50, half price, half of what I paid for this new one. And as I read the reviews, particularly on CNET and PCMag.com, it has an 8 meg camera that takes the pictures, 5 meg front facing. The one I have has 13 back facing, and I think it was 5 front facing. But the review said the camera shots were okay, kind of a little fuzzy, but okay. And the battery had some issues. Well, the one I have, a larger one, battery's great. So even though I contemplated spending half, $50 rather than $100, it doesn't really matter if it's not giving me what I want. So if you can't really compete on price because you're not giving the market what it really wants, the value, then what good is it? So these things have to be thought out and thought through, because price isn't always an option or isn't always an issue. And a lot of businesses take it as, well, if I just offer $1 off, I'll get more business. Not if you're not meeting the need and offering value. Another thing to consider in trying to defeat your competition. And finally, how relentless are you? Just like a boxer, going in there, weighing the situations, having a strategy, and then going at it, and not giving up. I mean, that's they take a beating, and get worn out and all that and whatever. But again, it's sort of a similar thing. They're getting scored on how many solid punches they're getting, and their score can outscore the competition in the long run. If they don't knock them out, they can win by a better score. And it's kind of that way with business. You may not defeat the competition, but you're going to be ahead in market share because of your strategy, how you're implementing things, how relentless you are in going after business and promoting yourself to get that business. So it's just interesting. And another thing I was watching over the weekend was a special on PBS about the Voyager mission. And they had these rocket scientists, so to speak, talk about, well, once we send that Voyager spacecraft out to Jupiter and Neptune and Uranus and Saturn, what happens if something doesn't work? And they talked about these what-if scenarios they were constantly contemplating. Okay, what if this happens? What are we going to do? Well, they did face an issue, several issues actually, and one of them was, well, in order to get out to Uranus, we've got to go really close to Saturn, but what if the radiation from Saturn burns out the electronics and wipes out the spacecraft? What do we do? And these were what-if scenarios before launch. Well, they came up with a real simple fix, and that was buy a whole bunch of aluminum foil and wrap everything in aluminum foil, and sure enough, it worked, and it didn't fry out the systems when they did go really close to Saturn. But that's just an example, running these what-ifs. What do I do if my competition does such and such? How am I going to... And the reason all this is important just happened this yesterday. And that is Whole Foods, owned by Amazon now, is going to be cutting prices. Now, you may say, well, there's only 500 of those stores. What difference does it make? Well, 38,000 grocers and Walmart's worried because of Amazon's platform. And they can now not only put in those stores Amazon Prime lockers to pick up food or pick up items, couponing, whatever, but they got the huge internet platform to offer those products at a discount, organic food products, on Amazon Pantry. That's what's worrying the 38,000 grocers, because Amazon's huge web platform. Again, that's why this having a strategy and relentless and determining what to do differently to avoid a price issue, to compete and defeat your competition. And I can tell you right now, I'll bet you those grocers are really nervous, because what do? Your margins are already thin. Amazon's moving in. What do we do? So these are things, to consider. There's some questions to answer. Your strategy. If price isn't an issue, what are you going to do different? How relentless are you? And I talk about being relentless in terms of marketing. And I've mentioned this before, but I'm amazed how many businesses don't actually have a marketing plan. They just shoot from the hip. And the only reason I can think of that is because they've got business already, or they brought over business when they started. They've got a good referral network, whatever. But what happens when that changes? And that can change drastically, just as we've seen with Amazon buying Whole Foods, and who knows what they'll do next. And suddenly you've got all these grocers nationwide worried. Did they contemplate that a year ago, 2 years ago? Who would have thought, So these are some things to answer to compete and to defeat your competition. Those 3 questions answer. And the relentlessness, again, comes down to, and I say this over and over, consistently targeting online prospects, customers, use social media, email marketing, test everything, and be relentless. Why? Because your competition's out there like a lion, and they're just getting ready to chew you up, and they will. So, be proactive. That's the message here, and answer those 3 questions. John Verlin, On-Demand Advertising Solutions. Great to have you along today. I've got a new email address. It's johnverlin12@AT&T.net. johnverlin12@AT&T.net. And you can always go to ondemandadvertisingsolutions.com to learn more about our solutions for your business. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week.